My name is Tamsin Wexler. I'm 29 and I'm an X-ray tech at a hospital outside Cleveland. On the night of October 11th, 2025, I had a seizure on the floor of my brother's engagement party. My skull cracked the edge of the kitchen island on the way down. Somebody screamed for an ambulance. My father took the phone out of their hand and told the 911 operator, "She's done this before for attention. I'm a neurologist. Stand down. We don't need EMS." Then he ended the call. I was awake for about 4 more seconds after that. Long enough to hear it. My father is Dr. Owen Wexler, chief of neurology at one of the biggest hospitals in Ohio. 40-some people were in that house. 9 of them later swore under oath exactly what he said. I had a second seizure on the kitchen tile before anyone overrode him. By the time real paramedics walked through the door, 11 minutes had gone by. I woke up 2 days later in the neuro ICU with a tube down my throat and called the one person I thought might still pick up. My brother, the golden child, the cardiology fellow, the one who'd never once had to fight to be believed. He didn't say much, he just emailed me a file, 61 pages. It belonged to our dad. And what was in it didn't only explain that night. It explained why the last 7 years of my life had felt like screaming into a pillow. That's when it landed on me, slow and cold. He hadn't just let it happen. He'd been steering me toward it the whole time. If you've ever begged the one person who was supposed to protect you to just believe you and watched them look right through you, hit like. Subscribe if you want to know how a man like that finally got caught. Because it gets worse before it gets better. I need to take you back to the spring of 2018, to a kitchen in Shaker Heights and a stack of mail on the counter. I was 22 and I'd just gotten the last no. 12 medical schools, 12 rejections. Case Western, Ohio State, Michigan, Pitt, Northwestern, Wash U, Cincinnati, Vanderbilt, Emory, Rochester, Tufts, and the last one, the thin envelope from Penn that I didn't even need to open. My MSCAT was a 517, my GPA was a 3.91. I had 2 summers in a stroke research lab, 400 hours volunteering in a pediatric ward, and a letter from my anatomy professor that called me the most intuitive student she'd worked with in a decade. I had everything except the one thing that mattered. A yes. My father didn't look up from his plate that night. He was eating with that careful, surgical neatness of his, lining the green beans up parallel before he took one. My brother, Caleb, 2 years older, already deep into his cardiology track, reached over and squeezed my wrist. "There's always next cycle," he said. And he meant it kindly, and somehow that made it sharper. "Your scores were fine, Tamsin," my father said. He said it the way he'd read out a lab value that was technically within range but not impressive. But not everyone is built for this. Medicine isn't a participation trophy. I remember the half-second before that last sentence. The little pause. Like he was deciding whether to be cruel, and then deciding it was kinder to be honest. My mother. She passed 2 years ago, lung thing, never smoked a day in her life. She put her hand over mine under the table, but she didn't say anything. She never said anything when he got like that. That was its own kind of answer. I didn't ask him whether he'd written my recommendation letters. He'd offered back in the summer of 2017, when I was assembling my applications. Practically insisted. He said a letter from the chief of neurology would carry weight. I'd been so grateful I cried in my car. I thought he was finally proud of me. I stopped asking him a lot of things after that dinner. 4 months later, I enrolled in a radiologic technology program at Cuyahoga Community College. 2 years, accelerated because I'd already crushed the prerequisites in undergrad. By the fall of 2020, I was certified and hired at a community hospital in Parma. I was good at it. I was fast, and I was careful, and I could read a chess film well enough that the residents started quietly asking me to flag things for them before the attending got in. I liked the work. It was honest. Nobody on a trauma overnight asks whether you went to medical school. My father my luxury harmentids. The first week I started, I told them at Sunday dinner that I'd caught a hairline pelvic fracture an ER resident had missed, and my father said, well, somebody has to run the machines, and went back to talking about Caleb's match list. That was the whole sentence. Somebody has to run the machines. I heard him introduce me once at a hospital gala my mother guilted me into attending. "This is my daughter," he told a colleague, and then there was this pause. 2 full seconds, and he said, "She works in imaging." Not, "She's a radiologic technologist." Just, "works in imaging." The way you described the parking attendant. That pause was the exact shape of the word he wouldn't use. Doctor. I stopped going to the galas, but I kept showing up to Sunday dinner. I kept answering when he called. I kept trying to be enough for a man who'd already decided I wasn't, and I hate that about myself even now. It started in the spring of 2023, a headache that wasn't like my other headaches. It came in the morning, behind my left eye, and it brought a smell with it, burnt toast when there was no toast. Sometimes the room would go shimmery at the edges, and I'd lose about a minute. I'd come back to myself standing in the supply closet with no memory of walking in there. I'm an imaging tech. I have spent my whole career standing next to people getting brain scans. I knew what an aura was. I knew what a focal seizure looked like from the outside. I just couldn't believe it was happening from the inside. So I called my father. April 19, 2023, 8:40 in the evening. I know because I started keeping a log in my phone after that night. Not because I suspected him of anything, God no. Because I doubted myself so much that I wanted to write down exactly what the chief of neurology told me, so I could follow it correctly. "Dad, I'm getting these episodes, visual stuff, a smell that isn't there, and I think I'm losing little chunks of time. I think these might be seizures." There was this long, patient sigh on the line. "Tamsin, are you sleeping?" "Not great, but are you under stress at work?" "Everybody's under stress at work, but Dad, the smell thing, that's a classic. You read too much. That's the problem with people in your position. You pick up the vocabulary without the training. What you're describing is anxiety. Probably an ocular migraine on top of it. You're sleep deprived and you're catastrophizing. Have you considered that you might want to see someone? A counselor, I mean." I asked if I should get an EEG. He actually laughed. Not a mean laugh, a worse one, a gentle one. "You don't need an EEG. You need 8 hours of sleep and to stop diagnosing yourself off the internet." I didn't push it. He'd been practicing neurology for 31 years. I'd been pointing an X-ray machine at people for 3. It happened again in the summer. I called him. "Sleep hygiene," he said. "It happened in the fall. Worse, I bit the inside of my cheek, so hard I tasted blood and didn't remember doing it." I called him. "Stress," he said. "You're internalizing your career. Disappointment, it's manifesting somatically." Winter of 2024. I had one at the grocery store and came to in the cereal aisle with a stranger's hand on my shoulder asking if I needed help. I called him from the parking lot shaking. "Tamsin," he said, in that voice. The one he used like I was a child asking whether the noise in the closet was a monster. "You are not having seizures. I would know. I'm a neurologist. You have anxiety and you need to treat it as anxiety. So I made an appointment with a therapist. I want you to understand that I did the thing he told me to do. I went 4 times. And on the 3rd visit I described one of the episodes, the burnt smell, the lost minute, and my therapist stopped writing and put her pen down and said, very carefully, 'Tamsin, has a neurologist actually looked at this? Because what you're describing is not what anxiety does.' And I said, 'My dad's a neurologist, he says it's anxiety.' And she got this look, and she didn't push, and I didn't push, because pushing meant my father had been wrong for a year, and that was a door I genuinely could not make myself open. That's what it does to you, the gaslighting. It doesn't just make you doubt your body. It makes you defend the person doing it." By the fall of 2025, I'd stopped telling him about the episodes at all. I'd started believing him. Maybe 7 years of being the family's disappointment really had made me dramatic. Maybe I was inventing symptoms to feel important. That's the part I can't fully forgive. Not what he did, but that I let him do it. October 11th. Caleb's engagement party. His fiancée's family had money, The kind of quiet Ohio money that shows up as a renovated farmhouse with a kitchen island the size of a car. I drove up from Parma that afternoon, with a headache already behind my left eye. I took 2 Advil and told myself to stop being dramatic. I'd had 3 small episodes that week. I hadn't told anyone. I was wearing a green dress I'd bought specifically for the night, and I remember thinking, in the bathroom before everyone arrived, that I looked tired in the mirror, gray around the mouth. The party was warm and loud and full of doctors. Caleb's people, cardiology fellows, an attending or two, the fiancé's father who turned out to be an orthopedic surgeon. 40-some people in a beautiful kitchen, all of them comfortable in a world that had a name for them. My father held court near the wine, telling a story about a resident, and when I came in he looked at me the way he looked at a scan with a finding he didn't like. "You look washed out," he said. "Are you sleeping?" He didn't ask if I felt okay. He commented on how I looked. That was always the move. Around 9 o'clock the smell came. Burnt toast, thick, out of nowhere, in a kitchen that smelled like rosemary and red wine. The lights got a halo. I put my hand on the counter and I thought, very clearly, not here. Not at Caleb's party. I don't remember the fall. People told me later. I remember the smell, and then I remember being on the floor with the side of my head wet and warm and the ceiling pulsing and my own arms not belonging to me, and a woman I didn't know. Caleb's fiancé's aunt, an ER nurse named Priya. I learned her name afterward, and I will love her for the rest of my life, shouting for someone to call 911 and turn me on my side. And then my father's voice, calm, carrying. The voice of a man who had spent 30 years being the most authoritative person in any room. "Everyone relax. She's done this before. It's psychogenic, she's been treated for anxiety. This is attention-seeking. I'm her father and I'm a neurologist. Don't call an ambulance, you'll just feed it." He took the phone right out of Caleb's fiancé's hands. He told the operator to stand down. He said, "We have it handled, I'm a physician." And he ended the call. 9 people heard him. I know it was 9 because 9 people later signed sworn statements. I was on the floor bleeding from a headlack into a hardwood floor, and the chief of neurology was telling a room full of doctors to ignore it, and for 90 seconds. This is the part that still wakes me up. They did. Because he sounded sure, because he had the title, because that's how it works. Then I had the second one, a full tonic-clonic, the kind you can't fake and can't argue with. My back arched off the floor. Priya, the ER nurse, shoved past my father, got down on the tile next to me, and pulled out her own phone. "What are you doing?" my father said. "I'm calling 911. I already told them not to come, she's not." "Sir, with respect, get out of my way." And then, into the phone, steady as anything, "I'm an ER nurse. 29-year-old female, second witness tonic-clonic in under 2 minutes, head laceration, she is not coming around between them. This is status, send EMS now." That was 9:14. The first call, the one my father killed, was 9:14. 11 rolled in at 9:23. 11 minutes. Status epilepticus is what they call it when seizures stack like that, without you surfacing in between, and every minute of it is your brain cooking. 11 minutes. I coded in the ambulance. Not my heart. I stopped breathing. Aspirated. My oxygen sat dropped into the 70s. They tubed me on the way in. I have no memory of any of it. I have the run sheet. I've read it more times than is healthy. I woke up on October 13th. There was a tube in my throat and a pressure in my skull, and a nurse named Yusuf who saw my eyes open and said, gently, "There she is. You're at university hospitals. You're in the neuro ICU. You've been with us 2 days." They pulled the tube a few hours later, and my throat felt like I'd swallowed gravel. The neurologist on service, Dr. Jew, Ashland, not my father's department, a different hospital entirely, thank God, sat down beside the bed and told me I'd been in status epilepticus, that I'd had a documented structural finding on my MRI, that this had almost certainly been building for years. "How long have you had symptoms?" she asked. 2.5 years, I said. My voice was barely there. I told my dad he's a neurologist. He said it was anxiety. She got very still. He's a neurologist, she repeated. Chief of neurologist, she repeated. Chief of neurology. And I named his hospital. She wrote something down and did not say anything for a moment. And then she said, Tamsin, an EEG and an MRI would have caught this in an afternoon. Any of these episodes you described, the focal ones, the auras, that's a workup. That's a Tuesday. That's not a close call. She paused. Did he ever order any imaging? No. Any medication? No. Just anxiety. Therapy. She didn't say the word. She didn't have to. The word was negligence, and it was sitting in the room with us. She also told me, more gently, that Caleb had been there every day, that my father had come once, for 9 minutes. He'd stood at the foot of the bed, she said, looked at the monitors, and left. 9 minutes, in 2 days, for his daughter in the ICU. I don't know why that's the number that broke me, and not the 11 minutes on the floor, but it is. Caleb came at 2 that afternoon. He'd been coming on his lunch from his fellowship. He sat down and took my hand, and he was crying before he got a word out. Tamsin, I didn't know. I swear to God I didn't know he hung up on them until Priya told me afterward. I keep replaying it. I should have grabbed the phone back. I just froze. He sounded so sure. Did you know, I asked him, that I'd been telling him about symptoms for 2.5 years? He went white. What? No. He never said a word. Why would you? I said. You're the one he wrote the real letters for. He didn't understand that yet. Neither did I, fully, until I asked him to do one thing. Caleb, when you go home tonight, Dad keeps everything. Can you find my medical school recommendation letters? The ones he wrote in 2017? Letters? The ones he wrote in 2017. He looked at me like I'd asked him to dig up a grave. Tamsin. Why? Because I had a 5.117 and a 3.91, and I got rejected from 12 schools and I never understood it. And I need to know what he wrote. Please. He didn't promise. But I knew my brother, and I knew he'd look. The file came to my inbox at 11:51 the next night. Subject line. Just. I'm so sorry. 61 pages. A PDF. There was a note above the attachment. I found these on his backup drive. I read 3 pages and stopped because I was going to throw up. Tamsin. I didn't know. I didn't know any of it. I love you. Call me. Peen Mickey. The first pages were the letters. The ones he'd insisted on writing. Chief of Neurology, hospital letterhead, his signature at the bottom. The Case Western one opened warm. My daughter is bright and diligent, her academic record is strong. And then the last paragraph. I would be doing this committee a disservice if I did not note in confidence that Tamsin has a history of emotional fragility and a tendency to crumble under sustained pressure. I have observed in her a pattern of anxiety and somatic complaints that I fear are not compatible with the demands of clinical training. I cannot in good conscience recommend her without significant reservation. The Ohio State one was worse. Same warm, open. Then there is, additionally, a family history of psychiatric instability that I believe bears on her candidacy. We don't have a family history of psychiatric instability. He made it up. He invented a diagnosis out of thin air and signed his name and his title to it and mailed it to the school I dreamed about since I was 16. The Michigan one finished me. As both her father and a physician on faculty at a peer institution, I feel obligated to share that I do not believe my daughter pursues medicine out of genuine calling, but out of a need for my approval. I would recommend against admission, with the possibility of reconsideration in several years should she mature. I read them in an ICU bed at 1 in the morning with a head full of staples, and I understood, finally, why 12 schools had said no to a near-perfect application. He hadn't put in a good word. He'd put a knife in my back and called it honesty. The next 50-some pages were medical records. My records. Because here's the thing I hadn't let myself see. He'd listed himself as my primary doctor for years. Every one of those phone calls, the ones I logged so carefully so I could follow his advice, he'd also been documenting. Patient reports visual aura and possible focal episodes. Assessment, anxiety, somatic symptom disorder. Plan, counseling, sleep hygiene. No imaging indicated. April 2023. July 2023. November 2023. February 2024. 5 entries. 5 textbook descriptions of focal seizures written down in his own hand. 0 EEGs. 0 MRIs. 5 times anxiety. The last entry was dated October 9, 2025, 2 days before the party. Daughter texted recurrent episodes, reassured, counseled to enjoy brother's celebration and cease catastrophizing. I sat there and I put it together. He sabotaged my way into medicine so I'd always be beneath Caleb. Then he spent 2.5 years telling me my own brain was lying to me so I'd doubt the one kind of knowledge I did have. And then, when my body finally proved me right in front of 40 people, saving me would have meant admitting he'd been wrong for years. So he chose to be right. He chose his reputation over my breathing. I said it out loud to the darkroom. He needed me to fail. And when I almost died anyway, being right mattered more to him than I did. I called Caleb at 1:30 in the morning. He picked up on the first ring. He hadn't been sleeping either. I only said one thing. I'm filing a complaint with the medical board. And I'm getting a lawyer. Are you going to be able to live with that, or not? There was a long quiet. Then my brother said, I'll testify. Whatever you need, I should have seen it years ago. The lawyer found me, actually, before I found her. A wedding guest had leaked the story to a local reporter, and it ran small in the Plain Dealer. Chief of Neurology overruled EMS at family party, and a malpractice attorney named Delphine Okafor called the hospital and asked to speak with me. 19 years in, she came to the ICU in a charcoal suit and read the file in 20 minutes and set it down on the rolling tray and said, Tamsin, I have done this a long time. This isn't a gray case. He was your listed physician. He had a duty of care. He documented seizure symptoms 5 times and ordered nothing. Then he physically obstructed an emergency call while you were in status. The only thing standing between him and a very bad day is whether you have the stomach to do this to your own father. She paused. And I have to be honest with you. This will end your family as you know it. My family ended, I said. When he hung up that phone. She took the case. She told me the first move was a complaint to the State Medical Board of Ohio, and that the strongest version of it had witnesses. A lot of them. Caleb spent the next week making the hardest phone calls of his life. He went to those 40 party guests, his own colleagues, his fiancé's family, and he asked them to tell the truth. 9 of them signed sworn statements. 3 were physicians. Priya, the ER nurse, gave a 2-page affidavit with the exact timestamps off her phone. The orthopedic surgeon, the fiancé's father, wrote that in 26 years of practice, he had never seen a physician use his credentials to waive off care for a patient who was actively seizing on the floor, and that he was ashamed he'd hesitated even the 90 seconds he had. One of the cardiology attendings, a man who'd known my father for 15 years, wrote a single devastating line. I no longer recognize the colleague I thought I knew, and I believe the board must act. Delphine also subpoenaed hospital records and found something I didn't expect. 2 incident reports filed by EMS the night of the party, flagging that a physician had obstructed dispatch. They'd gone to risk management. Nothing had happened. Buried, probably because of who he was. That helps us, Delphine said. It shows the system knew and did nothing. It shows this wasn't a one-time lapse. My father's lawyer sent a cease and desist letter accusing me of defamation. Delphine read it, snorted, and wrote back 2 sentences. The truth is an absolute defense. We look forward to discovery. Caleb's fiancé's family stood by us, which I did not expect and will never forget. My father, meanwhile, started working the phones. An uncle called me to say I was being hysterical, that I was destroying a man who'd saved thousands of patients over a misunderstanding. I asked him if he knew about the letters. He didn't answer. I blocked him that night. My father sent one email. the only direct contact he attempted. It said, "You are throwing away this family over your own resentment. I hope it's worth it." There was no, "Are you okay?" There was no, "I'm glad you survived." I read it twice and deleted it and felt for the first time in 7 years, completely clear about who he was. The board moved faster than anyone expected. The thing about an actively seizing patient and a documented obstructed 911 call is that it isn't ambiguous. They scheduled an emergency interim hearing for early December, the kind they only convene when they think the public is at risk right now. It was held in Columbus. 12 board members. My father came with 2 lawyers and, on their advice, refused to answer a single question. Priya testified for 20 minutes and put her call log up on the screen, 9:14 p.m., and described what she'd walked into. A board member asked her point blank whether, in her professional opinion, my father's actions had constituted obstruction of emergency care, and she said one word: "Yes." Caleb testified next. He entered the 61-page file into evidence. He read 3 of the letters out loud in a flat voice, because he told me later it was the only way he could get through them. When he got to the fabricated psychiatric history, his voice cracked, and the chair offered him a recess, and he said no, he wanted to finish. The board chair asked him at the end, "Dr. Wexler, do you believe your father is fit to practice medicine?" My father was sitting 15 feet away. My brother looked at him and then looked back at the board and said, "No, I don't." Dr. Ashland came as an expert. She walked them through my MRI and the 5 clinic notes and built a timeline on a screen. Symptoms reported, standard of care, what was actually done, and the gap between the 2 columns was so wide you could hear the room react. "Any of these visits warranted an EEG," she said. "It's an inexpensive, low-risk standard test." Dr. Wexler ordered nothing. He recorded textbook focal seizures and called them anxiety 5 separate times while serving as her physician. "This is not a difficult diagnostic case. This is a refusal to look." Asked whether early diagnosis would have changed anything, she said, "If he'd ordered imaging in the spring of 2023, she'd have been on medication within a week. The party never happens. None of it happens." The board deliberated for under an hour. The chair read it out. "Sufficient evidence of gross negligence, conflict of interest, and obstruction of emergency care to warrant immediate suspension of Dr. Owen Wexler's license, effective that day, pending the full investigation." The vote was 11-1. As he left, a reporter asked him if he regretted it. He said, "On camera, I did what I believed was right." Delphine leaned over to me and murmured, "He just handed us the civil case." No apology. There was never going to be an apology. His hospital announced his resignation within 72 hours. And then the part I truly didn't see coming. Other people started calling Delphine's office. 3 women in the first week, then more. Patients of his over the years. A 41-year-old woman whose early MS he'd written off as stress for 3 years. A young man whose father had brought him in twice for what turned out to be a brain bleed, sent home both times with a prescription for sleep and a lecture about anxiety. The plain dealer ran a second story, and the headline was the one that finally cracked something open in this city. His daughter wasn't the first, she was just the one with proof. I'm not going to tell you it healed everything. I have a scar along my hairline and a seizure disorder that's well controlled on medication now, the medication I could have had 2.5 years ago. I have to think about that every time I take the pill. My father's license is still suspended. The full revocation hearing is next year, and Delphine says it'll likely stick. The civil suit is set for the fall. He'll probably never go to prison. And I've made my peace with that, mostly because what I needed wasn't a cell. What I needed was the truth on a record where he couldn't edit it. Caleb and I talk every week now, real talking. He's in therapy unlearning the thing our father built him to be, the proof that I was the failure. He needed one of us to be the example, and one of us to be the warning, Caleb said once. And I let him cast me without ever asking what it cost you. We're learning how to be a brother and a sister instead of a verdict. 3 months after the party, I was working an overnight in Parma, and a woman came in by ambulance, mid-30s, with what the chart called a panic episode. But she kept describing a smell. Burnt rubber, she said, that nobody else could smell. Right before the spells. I set up her head CT, and then I went and found the ER attending and I said, I think you want neuro on this one. I think these are focal seizures, and I think somebody's been telling her it's anxiety. He looked at me a second, then ordered the EEG. It lit up. Temporal lobe. They caught it that night. When I told her she was going to be okay, that they'd found it, that it had a name and a treatment, she started to cry and grabbed my hand and asked how I knew to push for it. Because somebody told me mine was anxiety for 2.5 years, I said. And I'm never going to let that happen to someone else if I can help it. People ask me if I've forgiven my father. I haven't. Maybe I won't. But I've forgiven myself for believing him, for the 7 years I spent making myself smaller to fit the size he'd assigned me. Your knowledge is real even if no one ever put the word doctor in front of your name. Your body is not a liar even when the person who's supposed to love you most insists that it is. And sometimes the road they sabotaged you onto is the only one that turns you into the person who can finally see someone else drowning and reach them in time. My name is Tamsin Wexler. I run the machines. I caught one tonight that almost got missed. And that, it turns out, is more than enough. For 7 years I made myself smaller to fit the shape my father had assigned me, and the strangest part is that I helped him do it. Every time I called him about the smell of burnt toast that wasn't there, every time I logged his answer so I could follow it correctly, I was handing him the very thing he used against me. That's the part I sit with now. A lie only works if the person being lied to agrees to stop trusting themselves, and for a long time, I agreed. The cause and the effect of my whole life turned out to be the same sentence. He needed me to doubt what I knew. So, I doubted it, and doubting it nearly killed me on a kitchen floor. What pulled me out wasn't luck. It was a stranger named Priya, who refused to let a title decide whether I lived. She didn't have the loudest voice in that room, my father did, but she had something better. She had the steadiness to look at what was actually in front of her and act on it, even with the chief of neurology telling her to stand down. I think about that a lot. Being smart isn't memorizing the right answer. It's having the nerve to keep looking when the most powerful person in the room is telling you there's nothing to see. Priya looked anyway. Dr. Ashland looked anyway. My brother Caleb, who froze for 90 seconds and has had to live with that, finally looked anyway too, and he opened a 61-page file knowing it would cost him his father. If there's anything I'd want you to carry out of this, it's 3 things that don't come naturally and have to be built. The first is the simple decency to believe people when they tell you they're hurting, especially the ones it would be more convenient to dismiss. Because my father had the training to help me and chose his pride instead, and that choice is the whole story. The second is the habit of trusting evidence over authority, your own included. I had the knowledge to recognize a focal seizure for 2.5 years, and I let a louder voice talk me out of my own eyes. And the third is the plain refusal to quit on yourself. I almost did. There were nights I genuinely believed I was just dramatic, just broken, just the family disappointment inventing problems for attention. The day I picked up the phone and called a medical board on my own father was the day I stopped letting someone else write the verdict on who I was. I run the machines. That's the title he wouldn't give me, and it turned out to be the one that mattered. 3 months after I nearly died, a woman came in describing a smell nobody else could smell, and I knew. I knew because I'd lived it, and because I'd finally learned to believe what I knew. My father spent years trying to make me less than my brother. Instead, he made me the one person in that ER who recognized her. That's not forgiveness, it's just the truth, and I'm done letting anyone edit it.